be just like what we covered yesterday, okay? So don't expect any great big shakes. Certain topics are super big. This is one of the super big topics. So we're definitely taking 2 days to go over it and to make sure that you understand it. Now, when we come into class tomorrow, we're going to begin to do some word problems that involve quadratic equations. So if you don't completely understand the basics of how to solve a quadratic equation today, then when you do the word problems tomorrow, if you have to think, oh man, how do I solve that quadratic equation? Then you can't concentrate on word problems. I don't know about you guys, but for me, word problems are the hardest part of math. Okay? So if you have to split your attention between the word problem and the basic method of solving a quadratic equation, you're setting yourself up for trouble. So make sure that you understand how to solve a quadratic equation before we're done. And the really cool thing is that if you go to Patrick Medford Library this evening, 5:30 to 7:30, there's a very good chance that you will leave better at factoring and better at solving quadratic equations if you're having problems. Now, by all means, if you're getting everything right, don't go to the library. Stay home. Do whatever you want to do and so on and so forth. But if there's problems, then by going to the library, we get a chance to help you out. The last couple of weeks, I've had 3 kids there, 1 kid there, 2 kids there. So I know some weeks, particularly when we have relearn packets to get done, there's 20 kids there. And that's very difficult on everybody. All right, so here we go. X squared minus 11x plus 19 equals negative 5. And there's something about this that makes it the way it is impossible to do. Leanne? Yeah, it equals negative 5 at the end. Anytime we have a quadratic equation, and this is a cosmic shift in how to solve an equation. When you were first introduced to equations, Mrs. Antos, great teacher, Mrs. Antos used to tell her kids, used to teach her kids, you gotta run away from the stinky cheese. And she'd say the stinky cheese was the variable, and she'd say, oh, you gotta get everything away from the variable. So you'd put it on the other side. If the variable was on the left, you'd work to the right. And she'd say, that's how we do that. And with quadratic equations, it's exactly the opposite. You want to get everything on the side of the stinky cheese. That is to say, everything on the side of the variable. Plus 5 plus 5. X squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. Now, the minute you get everything on one side, your next step is to factor. And that was the importance behind the quiz. Because if you can factor, which the quiz was seeing that you could do, these quadratic equations are easy. Well, are you ever going to get quadratic equations right if you can't factor? No. Now the next quiz is kind of half review, half new stuff. There's 1 quadratic equation on the next quiz, there's 1 factoring on the next quiz, and there's 2 review questions. But if you don't learn them, then your next quiz is going to be disappointing too. All right, what are the factors here? Andre?
X minus 8 and X minus 3.
Good. Now, we get to the point where we say, maybe I got a number in behind my back. It's the number. What I can tell you about the numbers behind my back is 1 in each hand. If you multiply them, you get 0. What can you tell me? 1 or both have to be what? 0. So maybe it's the guy on the left. Maybe it's the guy on the right. We don't know which one it is. We'll never know. Add 8 to both sides. X is equal to 8. Add 3 to both sides. X is equal to 3. Now, if you substitute them back in, it's going to check. I'm going to plug in a 3 and just do it off the top of my head very quickly. 3 squared is 9, minus 11 times 3 is 33, plus 19, that's going to be negative 24 plus 19 is negative 5, and of course that equals negative 5, so it checks. The same thing would work with 8. That would check as well. Okay? Any questions? Now, it's not so much that you need to be an expert at this now, but you do need to be an expert at this by tomorrow. You have to be fantastic at it. So when we hit these very difficult word problems, we don't even have to think about how to solve a quadratic equation. That's like, requires no part of our brain to do. All right, number 6. What do you notice about number 6? At first it looks really, really difficult, but it's actually much easier than the previous question. Why?
N equals 0.
Okay, and it's a quadratic, so I don't have to get it all on one side. But what about the factoring? What do you notice about the factoring here? Should you set up double packages?
No.
No. Why don't you set up double packages? Because it's a what? Okay. It is a What's the called?
The numbers. There's no like adding or subtracting.
Common factor.
Common thing.
Yeah, there's a common factor here. What's the common factor I have?
One.
Not one. One's trivial. Everything's always one. It's x. So then I get 7x plus 1 equals 0. Now let's just do a quick mental check back to make sure that we're right. Now, this was what was very disappointing on number 1. If you got number 5 wrong on the quiz, I kind of get it. But I did give you a hint in the quiz. I said you got to reduce that fraction first. Then it worked out right. Kia's nodding her head up and down because she reduced the fraction. Savannah reduced the fraction. They got it right. The people who left the denominator 12 and they had 8/12, that reduces to 2/3. And it should have been 3x plus 2, not 12x plus 8. But number 1, that one was a little tricky. So I wasn't freaking in my mind about, oh, they got number 1 wrong. I'm like, they'll figure that one out. That's not a big deal. Do a couple more examples. But number 1 on the quiz, you should have gotten right. The reason is you should have multiplied back and checked your answer. So if you got number 1 wrong, you're not doing a quick mental check. Now, can you imagine if you set up an equation like this and you never do a quick mental check, you do all your work, you're gonna get it wrong because you factored wrong. Not because you don't know how to solve a quadratic equation. Check it out. What's x times 7? 7x squared. What's x times 1? X. So I know I did it right. Maybe it's the guy on the left, and I know this looks weird, but the guy on the left is an x. So it's simply x equals 0, and I don't need to solve it. I'm done. And then over here, 7x plus 1 equals 0. Now, minus 1, 7x is equal to negative 1, divide by 7, and I get negative 1/7, and I also get 0. Now, I want to just mention a point here that's very important for consideration. At some point, kids get into the pattern, because kids are lazy by nature. Mathematicians are lazy. It doesn't make you bad to be lazy. But what we're doing in our minds is we're always looking for shortcuts that make life a little bit easier. So what a lot of kids will do is this. They begin to notice that if the factor is x minus 8, hey, what's the answer turn out to be? Positive 8. And if this was negative 3, what's the answer turn out to be? Positive 3. So kids will get to this stage, and then they just kind of do this. 8 and 3. Dangerous. See, if it's just 1x and 1x, you can do that and it will always work. But notice what happened when it was 7x. Did the answer come out to be negative 1? No. As soon as there's a coefficient in front of that x, I have to divide by that, and I get a fraction every time. So it works out to be, the negative sign I lost there a little bit, works out to be negative 1/7. So you can't just go switching all the time and say, why does he bother even writing that out? I don't want to do that. Because if there's a number in front of the coefficient, like 7x, you're actually going to get a fraction as part of your answer, not just a whole number. Okay? All right, so let's go to the next one. 7r squared minus 14r equals negative 7. And this is a great question to go over. What's the first step I need to do, everybody? Everybody.
Get the 7.
Add 7, right, to both sides, because we want it to quadratic, we want everything on one side. 7r squared minus 14r plus 7 equals 0. Now, when you look at that, what are you always supposed to do when it comes to factoring? Every time you do a factoring, you're always supposed to do something before you begin. I know you know, I'm waiting for somebody else. Come on, talk to me. What do you always do before you begin?
Look for the common multiple.
Common factor. Good. What is the common factor between 7r squared, 14r, and 7? Everybody? 7. So pull out that 7. R squared minus 2r plus 1 equals 0. Now, isn't this easier to factor? Right? It's a whole lot easier. So when you see that common factor, pull it out. It makes life very, very simple. Now, the 7, keep it there, don't lose it. Now I'm going to factor my trinomial. Oh, that's easy. Come on. What's the factors of r squared minus 2r plus 1? Wilfredo? That's right. R squared minus 1r minus another r is minus 2r plus 1. There we go. Now, this time, I have 3 hands behind my back. And when I multiply the 3 things, I get 0. So 1 or 2 or 3 of them might be 0. They don't have to be, they might be. Maybe it's the first guy. Maybe it's the second guy. Maybe it's the third guy. Can 7 ever equal 0?
No.
No, so I cross it out. It's impossible. I reject it. I considered the possibility. It cannot be. I reject it. It's very important to take the time to write that step, because what if the common factor was r and not 7? Then I would get r equals 0. Could that be? Yeah, that could have been. Okay? Add 1 to both sides, r equals 1. Add 1 to both sides, r equals 1. In this case, the only answer is 1. It's twice, but the only answer works out to be 1. Okay. So now we're looking at number 8, and now we get to 1. Is there a common factor in number 8? No. So now this becomes a Plan B factor. Let me scroll it up here a little bit. All right, so it's a Plan B type of factoring. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this 2, and I'm going to put it here. It's already equal to 0, so I don't need to do anything. So I get d squared plus 5d minus 24 is equal to 0. What are the factors of that?
24.
8 and 3. I like 8 and 3. Which one's positive and which one's negative? Positive 8, because that's always the sign of the bigger number. Negative 3 equals 0. Now, the only thing is here, didn't I multiply by 2 here? So what do I have to do now? Divide by 2. So I'm going to get d plus 4 and 2d minus 3 equals 0. Once I go all the way out and clean it all the way up. So that gives me, maybe it's the guy on the left, d plus 4 is 0, maybe it's the guy on the right, 2d minus 3 is 0, minus 4, d is negative 4, plus 3 plus 3. Here's your danger, danger, danger one, because there's a lead coefficient other than 1, and I get negative 4 and 3/2 or 1 1/2. I'm perfectly cool with fractions, so don't feel like you need to convert it. If you do, you could make a mistake. You will not get it any righter. Okay, d is equal to 3/2. Any question on those quadratic equations? Okay, cool. Top of the next page. Do A and B. What value or values of x make each of those undefined? What does undefined mean again, everybody?
A equals 0.
No. What equals 0?
Answer.
No. What does undefined mean, everybody? 0 where? In the what? Denominator. Right? Or the bottom if we want to be less technical. Was everybody able to get that the answer to A is negative 4? Right? Are we good on that? Okay, you guys are still cranking out the answer to B? Okay, it's a quadratic equation. You know how to solve it. Okay, any problem with letter B? Any issues at all? X equals 4, x equals negative 2. On your quiz, this type of factoring we looked very, very good at. Are there any questions on this? Numbers 2, 3, and 4, I don't think anybody in the class missed any of those questions. It was 1 and 4, 1 and 5 that gave difficulties. All right, now I want you to do numbers 2 and 3. Skip number 1, do numbers 2 and 3. Number 2 is a common factor guy. And number 3, you're going to have to subtract the 3b. Go ahead. feel free to talk to people if you get stuck, guys. Right? And when you're done, you can look up. I have both answers on the board. And you can see, are your answers right? Are they wrong? Hasta la vista. Vaya con Dios. Toodaloo. Ta-ta. Arrivederci. Smile a lot. Zane. Adios, amigos y amigas. Cheerio. Toodaloo. Ta-ta. You could be in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not tomorrow. All right.
And Thursday too, if you need it.